When Jayan woke up, he found his phone with 19 missed calls and a comparable number of voicemail messages. He was unable to determine the area code because he had set his phone to send unknown numbers to voicemail after repeatedly receiving Chinese robocalls and spam calls. Bing Betty had not left a message, and his girls hadn't woken up yet, so he started listening to the messages. It was then that he realized his wife Randy wasn't in Jacksonville, Florida, as she had promised, spending the weekend with her parents and sister. When his phone screen came to life that morning, he went to the phone homepage and saw the new Newswire headline, "Freak Wildfire Consumes Suburban Boulder Subdivision Overnight." John found it interesting that his phone was sending him push notifications of news, which is usually a hassle, but taking the time to disable that feature never seemed worthwhile. He remembered seeing a news headline that included the words fire and boulder, the first to admit that he wasn't always the smartest tool in the shed. He could only think of one reason why his wife of 7 years would lie about where she was spending the weekend. He deliberately slowed down because there was no use in hurrying into anything. He made coffee because the girls wouldn't be awake for at least an additional hour. He took the coffee to his wife's office in the dining room, where he found her laptop. When he opened it, he saw that it was now password protected with an unknown password, but Randy was sluggish and unfocused. All of the presumptions made in this family before this morning are no longer true, and Jayan thought it was fairly clear that she was meeting up with her former college boyfriend Josh Turner in his Boulder office. He searched for a password written on a scrap of paper and discovered it hidden at the bottom of the desk's drawer. After gaining access, he discovered that she had not even shut down her email browsers. Instead, she had simply snoozed her computer based on her new password and clearly her belief that John would not invade her privacy. He broke Ree's heart by falling in love with the woman who would become his wife while Josh's wife was away. However, it seems that he had buyer's remorse over time. The emails were brief and mostly consisted of confirmations of arrival times. John assumed that they poured their hearts out to each other over the phone, but one unexpected detail surfaced. Her parents and sister knew about the situation and had agreed to cover for her. This was not mentioned in the emails, but rather in the Facebook Messenger conversations that were. She should have married Josh, whose family was wealthy. They all agreed. John was numb, as if he was watching a slow-motion car accident and couldn't take his eyes off it. He took a moment to breathe deeply, or else his Apple Watch would remind him that it was mindfulness time. He really needed to figure out how to turn that feature off. But he knew that if he didn't calm down and breathe deeply, he was likely to punch holes in the house's sheetrock walls. He called the hospital in Boulder after he identified himself, a clerk told him that Randy had been admitted with degree burns covering 80% of her body, including damage to her lungs from smoke inhalation. The fire appears to have flared up significantly suddenly in the drought-stricken area, spreading quickly with heavy winds cutting off communication. The switchboard answered presumptively and asked if Josh Turner was a patient. When they asked John to identify his relationship with Mr. Turner, he replied that he was a friend. The operator then stated that she was unable to provide any information of that kind. He looked at his wife's computer and saw that Randy had actually made him one of her friends, making it simple to identify Josh's friends and family. He even found Josh's wife, who had posted a public post from her. The only escape route from the development had destroyed over 100 homes. John apologized, saying, "It couldn't be my wife because she was in Jacksonville, Florida. You must have entered incorrect information." He hung up, knowing it was her in Boulder, but he wasn't going to make things easy for anyone. John thought as he called Josh's wife via Facebook Messenger to introduce himself and share what he had found, leaving his phone number. A little while later, as he finished his coffee, he noticed another notice light on the phone icon indicating a missed call. He didn't recognize the phone number, but there was a voicemail. The family was in San Diego, requesting prayers after learning that her husband had been hospitalized in Boulder with severe burns. It was time to have those prayers answered by a vengeful deity. He had to ask, "Miss Turner, your first name is actually Tina." She sighed. "I knew what would happen with the name before the marriage. I did it for love. It is no longer more than an icebreaker. You must be Ree's husband." "Yes," I responded. "When Josh and I first met, I was already aware of her. He's been acting odd recently, but I'm not sure why now. It all makes sense. Is that your tale too?" "I knew about Josh, but Randy didn't seem to be acting funny." "John, you were taking a gent." she said. Tina laughed when I asked how you were doing. She said, my blasted phone keeps telling me it's mindfulness time, and I should take deep breaths. I don't even want to see what it thinks of my heart rate. I asked if you sounded calm too. Tina said, I'm not sure what they are. My sister had some. Josh is severely burned. They have already placed him in a medically induced coma. He probably won't make it. I completely lost it when I heard that. I'm shocked, especially now that I know what happened to your wife. She was badly burned, but I don't know anymore. I told them that it couldn't be her because my wife was in Florida. Tina laughed again. Oh, the hospital is calling again. Let me get this and we'll keep in touch. She hung up, and John saved her number in contact so that the spam blocker wouldn't send it to voicemail. A second call came in, this time from Bob, who must have seen the news and become worried. Yes, John asked, and there was a pause. Bob had never liked JN and John had hated him as soon as it became clear that he was standing with the man. But they had always been friendly. When Bob noticed that John was not there, he asked John, have you heard from Randy? Bob paused. How come I'm going to hear from her without your knowledge? She's up in her old room. Isn't she spending time with you, your R-rated wife, and your other daughter, Bob? I knew John knew, and he sighed. She loves you. I understand we've never gotten along. I guess you never thought I was worthy of your daughter. But Josh was your wife, and both of my daughters have been smarmy jerks around me. I've put up with it to keep the peace, but it's over now, and let me be clear, if you were standing in front of me right now, I would repeatedly punch you in the mouth until you spat out blood-soaked teeth after that. John interrupted his voice, which was getting louder. That is total nonsense. When Nicole entered the kitchen with her younger sister Rebecca, her father said a horrible word that Rebecca announced, and Nicole asked him to repeat it. Daddy, I didn't hear it. John had to smile because there was nothing more he could have said to save time, even if he had blocked Bob's phone number and that of his mother-in-law and sister-in-law. Damn you to death, you and your lying family, you wretched jerks, he said, and hung up. When John asked Becky the bad word, she frowned and said, I don't remember. To which she replied quietly, D. JN then announced that today would be pancake day, with 3 pancakes each and some orange juice. Later, on Saturday morning, both girls were watching cartoons. John hoped that they were gateway cartoons to more serious shows like Pinky and the Brain or Phineas and Ferb. When the phone rang again, it was Tina Turner, who said that the pills weren't working. I told you that I was taking some pills to help me relax, but they aren't working. My sister responded, Why do you say that, Miss Tina Turner? John asked the hospital to send me to the intensive care unit, where Josh is in critical condition. The nurse put me on a speaker because she thought it might help Josh hear me, even though he is in a coma. What happened was that I lost my temper and yelled that his girlfriend is also badly burned and is likely going to die, and that it's his fault after you and I. He almost went into cardiac arrest after hearing me, even though he is in a coma. John asked, shocked. It's hard to say whether my yelling caused it or if it was just a coincidence that he made it through. Albia John apologized. She paused. What are you sorry, that he nearly died of heart arrest or that he survived? We're going on a round-the-world cruise and spending the entire time with each other in a store for reparations. However, he managed to keep them in check. Jay said, I'm sorry about everything, me too. After a minute, he asked her to tell him about the cruise we're taking. I don't know where that came from, she said. JN responded, I'm interested, she said. I bet you are. Are you interested, John? I saw on Facebook that you have a pretty face, but I didn't take the time to cyberstalk you properly. I'd be a good pick if I had to spend my revenge-loving time with anyone, she said. Why are you asking? Do I have a shot? Replied slowly. I've been wondering what was wrong with me ever since I realized he was cheating. And knowing that you're interested makes me feel a little better because you're not so badly looking yourself for what it's worth. John snorted at John, saying, It's nice to hear that even though my wife obviously preferred your husband, maybe the problem is not us. Tina Turner stopped again. Have you ever wondered why they did this? Tina asked. I suppose it's because they thought that they could have sex with people they weren't married to and get away with it, which makes it seem so easy. Tina asked, What else is there? John asked with a final tone. Tina said, We've got a lot to process. But let's stay in touch, because we're the only two people who know how the other one feels right now. All right, she laughed. I've got to go buy some Bermuda shorts on Amazon for the cruise and a Speedo bathing suit, because if you've got it, flaunt it. Get a cabin with a balcony. She giggled again, and they hung up. JN noticed that he had another voicemail, probably from the hospital. He called back and spoke to a nurse in Ree's room who also put the call on speaker. This nurse must be different from the one caring for Josh, but they all appeared to be following the same set of instructions, so he questioned whether that was typical in the field. Yes, I'm a nurse, young, she said. We're on speaker right now. I'm in the hospital's intensive care burn unit. John couldn't help but think that the hospital's family outreach standard operating procedures would need to be updated after today. He had to ask why I wasn't there when they brought her in. And one of my girlfriends told me that your wife had a death grip on her elbow and wouldn't let go until she grasped her message, which was to call her husband. Your wife is here, severely burned, and in a medically induced coma. She is right next to me, and we were hoping that the sound of your voice would help, even if she wasn't conscious. When asked to tell JN what was on her mind, the nurse said, "Okay." John snarled over the phone. "Listen, you miserable cheating wife, I pray you die in anguish and spend forever in hell alongside Josh, who will also perish. Just so you know, I'm going to spend all of my life insurance money once you're gone." She was remorseful and fought with the team with everything she had, refusing to let them do anything unless they convinced her they would deliver the message. John thought, way too little, way too late. "I'll never forgive you, Josh's wife." The call ended. The nurse must not have been listening when he began, but he seemed to be on the mend. John realized that at this pace he would not achieve his mindfulness goals, and he would definitely feel guilty about saying all that someday. But today wasn't that day. "Daddy, what does seduce mean?" Becky asked, holding her teddy bear. "What does it mean to lead someone astray?" John responded, and she looked thoughtfully. "When will Mommy be coming home?" Becky? When asked if this was the reason he was so upset about having to explain what was happening to his daughters, he said that he would need to carefully consider it, but he wasn't in the mood. Becky returned to the living room, and John watched her collapse in front of the TV. There was no way in hell that he was taking the girls to a hospital in Colorado to see their mother, who was covered in bandages like a mummy. He would much rather deal with their inability to understand than a memory like that made him 30. Minutes later, he had plane tickets, a reservation for one of Mickey's on-site hotels, and tickets for a week at Disney World. The following morning, Nicole would have to miss some kindergarten, but that was just the way things were going to go. As soon as he received the tickets, the hospital called back to inform him that Randy had died of a heart attack, and all attempts to save her had failed. Jay asked the time, and it was just about the time he yelled at her. Perhaps he would advise Tina to try yelling at Josh more and see if she had. John finally had to send Ree's health insurance information to the hospital in order to get them to give him the documents on the death. He called a local mortician and made arrangements to have her cremated with her burns. JN thought he should be able to get a discount, but they told him that they were still going to charge him the full price. He asked them to FedEx him the ashes after they returned from Disney. Maybe she just needed to be more passionate about it, but let her figure it out. Tina had not yelled at Josh again, so perhaps that helped him linger. Tina was back in Colorado staying with friends because her house was gone, and she was acting like the noble widow for her children. She told JN that she had not told them about Randy, but Tina's children were older than John's, and they knew that their father had been hurt in the fire, so it would have been all for the sugar and princess makeovers at the Bibid Bobby boutique. It has been more difficult to ignore John's children, who had no idea that he would keep things that way for a while. Not telling them anything negative about their mother was going to be difficult. Shortly after they returned from Florida, a FedEx man knocked on the door with two things that needed to be signed: a letter from his in-laws and a box containing ashes. The letter requested that they have Ree's remains so that they could arrange a funeral service and burial in his hometown of Florida. If John did not want to arrange something where he lived, they had to have. After calling around, he discovered that the letter lacked any sort of apology for filling in for Randy. This fact made the next decision simple. He got one of the local teenagers to babysit and left the girls to give the babysitter a detailed account of the Disney trip, including all of their swag and the pictures on the iPad. John then drove to a nearby national park with the box of ashes packed in a bag over his shoulder. John hiked to one of the park's rustic sections, which featured deep cinder block latrines in place of restrooms, recorded himself throwing the ashes in the latrine as instructed by fate. He had to hike back to the car to urinate, so he thought about getting some therapy, but the problem was that he wasn't angry anymore, at least not enough to hit people and ruin their reputations. Nevertheless, he uploaded the video to Facebook and gave an explanation. He then pondered whether the National Park Service would issue him a ticket for contaminating the cesspool. Would gladly pay. He never got in touch with his in-laws, but he noticed in the newspaper that they were having a celebration of life service in Jacksonville without him or his daughters. He informed the girls that their mother had an accident while she was away and that he wouldn't be returning, and they accepted it as he had anticipated. Fortunately, their kindergarten and daycare teachers were amazing and helped support them, and the life insurance payout was nice. Randy had more insurance than John, which he believed made it easier to rearrange his work life. When he led them into dragging out his tragic story, he left out the details about Randy cheating because he wanted to come across as sympathetic rather than pitiful. His kids started receiving invitations to numerous playdates, to which the mommies had invited their attractive single friends. Jan started to see a way forward. John never dated Tina Turner, but they did talk on the playground. What his daughters needed was lots of fresh air, especially at playgrounds with lots of kids and pretty young mothers. I'll see you in the next one. That concludes today's story. If you liked it, please give this video a thumbs up and leave a comment below. Your support helps the algorithm push my content further. If you're new to the channel, don't forget to hit the subscribe button. It really helps me keep creating more stories for you to watch.